The lesson title, it's in lesson 7 in the book of Job, and the title is called Retributive Punishment. Normally I don't do a preamble before I actually get into the lesson. However, this lesson I think is going to be very difficult for some people to hear, so I felt it necessary to do this preamble. If you had a child who was suffering with severe illness, fevers, festering lesions, and real misery, you would not hate your child. You would have great compassion for your child, and you would also feel sadness seeing them suffer. But you would want to accurately diagnose the source of the illness so a remedy could be provided. This is how I felt this week as I read the lesson. This lesson is filled with evidence, symptoms of a deep infection within the church that causes the church to be sick, to suffer, that keeps many Christians trapped in fear and in a false system of beliefs that obstructs their access to God and His true remedy to heal and restore them to His original ideal. Further, it is this very infection of thought that has obstructed the church from doing its last day mission to lighten the world for Christ's return. And by identifying this infection that is ravaging the child, if your child was sick, you're not seeking to attack the child, you're seeking to heal because you care. So by exposing this infection of thought, I'm not attacking the church. I'm actually seeking to bring healing so the church can fulfill its mission. So with that in mind, what do you think of the title? Retributive punishment. What does retributive mean? It's involving retribution. Okay, so what does retribution mean? If you look in the dictionary, it means requital or to return or reward according to the merits or deserts, especially for evil. Something given or inflicted in such requital or repayment or returning in kind. When you think of retribution, what comes to mind?
Anger.
How do you understand retribution? Through which law lens are you looking? Are you looking through imposed law, the type of laws that human beings and sinners make up? Or are you looking through design law, the creator of the universe? When you think of these words, human law works by the infliction of punishment. You break the rule, you get a ticket. You commit a crime, you go to jail. Some authority inflicts a punishment and a consequence upon you. That's how human law works. It's also known as coercion or compelling power. We're going to compel you with threats, and we're going to punish you if you don't do what we say. That's human governments. Is this how God's government works?
No.
God creates, think about it, He created space, time, energy, matter, life, relation. He constructed reality. His laws are the protocols upon which it all is designed to function. We can't do that. Satan attacks God and His law by proclaiming that God functions. Now get your mind around this. His allegation is that God functions no different than sinful beings. That's how He functions. He makes up rules, and He threatens to kill you if you don't keep His rules. That's Satan's allegation. It's a lie, and it's an infection of thought that's infected all of Christianity, including the SDA Church. And it cites fear and rebellion rather than love and trust. And this lesson is chock full of it. I'm going to pull it out for you and show it to you. And to be truthful about this is not an attack against a denomination or a church group, but to recognize that while God has His institutions, His church, Satan works to corrupt God's institutions by getting those institutions to accept and practice Satan's ideas and methods. Satan succeeded 2,000 years ago in getting God's institution on earth to accept his distorted view of law, such that when Jesus came, they accused Him of being a lawbreaker, and they executed Him. The same problem is happening today. And remember God's law of love, the principle of giving, how life is designed? We've gone through many examples in nature. Every breath you take, you give away carbon dioxide, and the plants get back oxygen to you. If you transgress the law and selfishly hoard your carbon dioxide to yourself, you die. Transgression of the law results in death. The law of liberty. In fact, on Yahoo News today, I saw an article this morning where a man in Indiana was arrested yesterday. Why? He proposed to his girlfriend. She said, "No, I'm not going to marry you." He reached over and pulled out a gun and shot and killed her. Shot her in the head, killed her. He admitted to it. Do you understand? So do you understand that as we unpack what's in the lesson is saying, Christ is the groom, the church is the bride. He's proposed for an eternal marriage with the groom. But if you don't say yes, He'll kill you. It's a lie. That's Satan's view. So Before we even get into the lesson, I think it's important to lay a foundation of the historic perspective that the Adventist Church was supposed to bring to the world. And this comes, all these quotes are from Ellen White from various sources. First one, Desire of Ages 759. Rebellion was not to be overcome by force. Compelling power is found only under Satan's government. The Lord's principles are not of this order. Notice, this doesn't say compelling power is usually found under Satan's government, or that God's principles are not often of this order. These are absolutes. Only under Satan's government do you find compelling power, and the Lord's principles are not of this order. His authority rests upon goodness, mercy, and love, and the presentation of these principles is the means to be used. God's government is moral, and truth and love are the prevailing power. What is the prevailing power? Truth and love. Remember that. It's going to come back up later as we talk about how the final end of sin and sinners come. Truth and love is the power that brings about the end. This is Review and Herald, September 7, 1897. God could have destroyed Satan and all his sympathizers as easily as one picks up a pebble and casts it to the earth. But by doing so, he would have given a precedent for the exercise of force. All the compelling power is found only under Satan's government. Does it say most compelling power? Or the majority of the compelling power? No, all compelling power is found only, not usually, but only under Satan's government. So what would it mean then if we present God as using such methods?
It'd be against his character.
And it means that we are presenting God in the character of Satan.
Yes.
That's what it means. I don't want to say it very, very clearly. Notice the very next words in the quote. So the words, all compelling power is found only under Satan's government. Next words, the Lord's principles are not of this order. He would not work on this line. This principle is wholly of Satan's creation. How much wiggle room is in there? Okay? The lesson for today argues the same argument that Satan does, that God's principles are the principles of force, coercion, compelling power, the infliction of pain, suffering, and death. I will read these things out of the lesson as we go along, but I'm laying a foundation. This is not the message that we were supposed to take. This is the message from Ellen White that our church was supposed to take, but we've been infected with a distortion. Keep going with some quotes. This is Acts of the Apostles, page 12. Whereunto, asked Christ, shall we liken the kingdom of God? Or with what comparison shall we compare it? Mark 4:30. He could not employ the kingdoms of the world as a similitude. In society, he found nothing with which to compare it. Earthly kingdoms rule by the ascendancy of physical power. But from Christ's kingdom, every carnal weapon, every instrument of coercion is banished. Again, is there room for exceptions? Does it say every carnal weapon of coercion is banished except for the final end when God in justice uses carnal weapons to punish and kill? That's what the lesson teaches. God is not the source of death. God is the source of life. Desire of Ages 761. In the opening of the great controversy, Satan had declared that the law of God could not be obeyed, that justice was inconsistent with mercy, and that should the law be broken, it would be impossible for the sinner to be pardoned. Every sin must meet its punishment, urged Satan. This argument that justice requires that God punish sin started in heaven with Satan and his rebellion in heaven, and we are still perpetuating the lie. What do you think when you hear preachers say, evil must be punished? God must punish sin. This is what a third of the angels thought sounded so right. It's all predicated on assuming that God's law functions like ours. See, if God's law is like ours, then it's true God would need to be punished or there's no justice. Because if we have laws and there's no enforcement, see, then it's not fair. Fairness requires enforcement. But the whole distortion is this belief that God's laws are no different than our own. And then, first selected messages 235. We are not to regard God as waiting to punish the sinner for his sin. The sinner brings the punishment upon himself. His own actions start a train of circumstances that bring the sure result. Every act of transgression reacts upon the sinner, works in him a change of character, and makes it more easy for him to transgress again. By choosing to sin, men separate themselves from God, cut themselves off from the channel of blessing, and the sure result is ruin and death. This is not an infliction. This is the natural consequence of separating yourself from the source of life. Does this mean there's no punishment for sin? Does this mean there's no retribution for sin? Of course not. The retribution, however, comes out from sin, not from God. What does the Bible actually say? Romans 6:23. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. It's a stark contrast. The lesson is saying the punishment of God is eternal death. That's what it's saying. But it's not what the Bible says. Or James 1:15. Sin, when full grown, gives birth to death. Or Galatians 6:8. The one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. Ellen G. White never uses the term retributive punishment. Never. Can't find it, at least in the CD-ROM. Type that in, you can't find it.
Well, it's in the lesson in the Bible commentary where she says, we are not living in the time of retributive judgment.
You didn't let me next say. She never uses the phrase retributive punishment. Next phrase, she does use the term retributive judgment. Okay? Is there a difference? Is there a difference between retributive punishment and retributive judgment? How does love work? Does love seek to harm or to save? To punish or to deliver? How does love work? So God is love. How does God work? So what does love do when the one who is loved uses their freedom to insist on rebellion and rejection of all endeavors to save? What does love do? Does love make a judgment at some point that there is nothing more that can be done for that person? The person is beyond reach. Does love at some point let go its interventions to protect? And what happens when love stops interceding with sickness, with deviations from violations from the protocols that life is built upon? Is there terrible suffering and death that occurs? But why? Because of an infliction of the ruling authority? Or because the ruling authority is making a judgment, there's nothing more I can do, I'm setting you free to reap what you've chosen? Notice this description again from Ellen White, Counsels to the Church, page 336. We are near to the close of time. I have been shown that the retributive judgments of God are already in the land. The Lord has given us warning of the events about to take place. Light is shining from his word, yet darkness covers the earth and gross darkness the people. So we got this description. Retributive judgment. The question is, well, what action? What actual action does God take that makes this retributive judgment? Continue on to the very next paragraph, not skipping anything. The Lord is removing his restrictions from the earth, and soon there will be death and destruction, increasing crime, and cruel evil working against the rich who have exalted themselves against the poor. Those who are without God's protection will find no safety in any place or position. Human agents are to be trained and are using their inventive powers to put in operation the most powerful machinery to wound and to kill. What is God's action? What is he actually doing? Letting go. Withdrawing, removing restrictions, setting free those in rebellion. Who is training these human agents? From where is the destruction and death originating? Continue on to the next paragraph. Again, not skipping anything. The judgments of God are in the land. The wars and rumors of wars, the destruction by fire and flood, say clearly that the time of trouble, which is to increase until the end, is very near at hand. What are God's judgments that are in the land? They are his accurate diagnoses of the hearts of the people, his judgments that there's nothing more that love and mercy can do, so he sets them free. And who is causing the trouble that's in the land? Is it God's angels? God's angels causing the trouble? Or is the righteous saints of God, the holy people who are to turn the other cheek and love your enemies? Is that who's causing the trouble in the land? Or is it the ones who have rejected God who are doing the violence in the land? It's Satan and his followers. What is the retributive judgment in this passage? She started out, retributive judgment. His judgment is they're beyond his reach, and he removes his restrictions, and then they go into self-destruct mode. This is Great Controversy 541. God has given to men a declaration of his character and his methods of dealing with sin. The Lord is merciful, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty. Exodus 34, 6 and 7. All the wicked he will destroy. The transgressors shall be destroyed together. The end of the wicked shall be cut off. Psalms 145, 20 and 37, 38. Now get this. The power and authority of the divine government will be employed to put down rebellion. Okay, what does it mean? Those who think through imposed law lenses hear that one sentence and immediately hear that God is going to use his power to inflict pain, suffering, and death. That God would act in a way a sinful human being would act. But we have to harmonize. Don't we have to harmonize this with all the other ones we just read? Where compelling power is never to be used. It's only under Satan's government. How do we harmonize that? Very next sentence after this one, the power and authority of the divine government will be employed. In fact, it's not even next sentence, it's a semicolon. So it's the continuation in the same sentence. The power and authority of the divine government will be employed to put down rebellion, semicolon. Yet all the manifestations of retributive justice will be perfectly consistent with the character of God as merciful, long-suffering, and benevolent being.
Amen.
Think that through. How can that be? You can never get that to work in imposed law models. It will work beautifully in design law, and we're going to unpack that. Next sentence. Again, not skipping anything. God does not force the will or judgment of any. Would that be true if, in fact, God was saying, love me, I just want you to love me. I've sent my son to die for you. I just love you that much. But if you don't love me, I will be forced by justice to use my power to torture and kill you as long as you deserve and kill you. If that were true and you believed he was saying that, can this be true? God does not force the will or judgment of any. No, we're compelled. We're coerced at that point. He can't be saying that. God does not force the will or judgment of any. He takes no pleasure in a slavish obedience. He desires that the creatures of his hand, and remember, we're in the context of a statement where she uses retributive justice. But notice how she's saying, this is what's key. Many people who hold to what the lesson holds to think through declaratives. What's a declarative? The declaratives, yet manifestations of retributive justice. That's a declarative. Now what we're going to read is a description of how that functions. She describes how it works, okay? He desires the creatures of his hand shall love him because he is worthy of love. He would have them obey him because they have an intelligent appreciation of his wisdom, justice, and benevolence. Amen. And all who have a just conception of these qualities will love him because they are drawn toward him in admiration of his attributes. Can this happen? Can you be drawn to their being in admiration of their love if they're threatening to kill you if you don't love them? No, it can't work. Those who teach this idea that we find in the lesson, and I'll read you the quotes, have been duped in believing Satan's view of God and God's government and how it works. And thus, they're obstructing the end-time mission of this church. The principles of kindness, mercy, and love taught and exemplified by our Savior are a transcript of the will and character of God. Christ declared that he taught nothing except that which he received from the Father. The principles of divine government are in perfect harmony with the Savior's precepts. Love your enemies. God executes justice upon the wicked for the good of the universe and even for the good of those upon whom the judgments are visited. What does it mean? These are words. What does it mean? How do you put it together? You think it through design law. Do we immediately, when we hear this judgment's visited, forget all the things we've read earlier about compelling power and coercive power? Do we forget all that and realize, okay, however that works, it can't be compelling and coercive? Are we so conditioned with the way human law works and these words of judgment and justice that we immediately fall back into, he's going to do it? What is justice? It's simply doing what is right. That's what it is, doing what's right. And what is the right thing to do to those who insist on separating themselves from God? What's the right thing to do?
Let him go.
Let them go. Keeping on with the quote. Not skipping anything. He would make them happy if he could do so in accordance with the laws of his government and the justice of his character. He surrounds them with the tokens of his love. He grants them a knowledge of his law and follows them with the offerings of his mercy. But they despise his law, they despise his love, make void his law, and reject his mercy. While constantly receiving his gifts, they dishonor the giver. They hate God because they know that he abhors their sins. The Lord bears long with the perversity, but the decisive hour will come when at last their destiny is to be decided. Pause. By whom?
Themselves.
Thank you. Do you know how many on this other view? God has a tribunal. He's going to look at evidence and he's going to decide their destiny. No. I'll keep reading. Will he then chain these rebels to his side? Will he force them to obey? Those are rhetorical questions, meaning he's not going to do it. Those who have chosen Satan as their leader have been controlled by his power and have been controlled by his power are not prepared to enter the presence of God. Pause. Why not? What has prevented them from being prepared? Who has prevented them?
Their choices.
Next sentence. Pride, deception, licentiousness, cruelty have become fixed in their characters. How did it become fixed in their characters? Did God fix it there? Did God determine this for them? Did God decide they would be this way?
No.
Get your mind around. This is design law. He has given us freedom. When we make choices to rebel, we transform and change ourselves. Neurobiology changes, character changes. Can they enter heaven to dwell forever with those who they despise and hate on earth? Truth will never be agreeable to a liar. Meekness will not satisfy self-esteem and pride. Purity is not acceptable to the corrupt. Disinterested love does not appear attractive to the selfish. What source of enjoyment could heaven offer those who are wholly absorbed in earthly and selfish interests? Could those whose lives have been spent in rebellion against God be suddenly transported to heaven and witness the high, the holy state, the perfection that exists there? Every soul filled with love, every countenance beaming with joy, enrapturing music and melodious strains, rising in honor of God and the Lamb, and ceaseless streams of light flowing upon the redeemed from the face of him who sits on the throne? Could those whose hearts are filled with hatred of God, of truth and holiness, mingle with the heavenly throng and join their songs of praise? Could they endure the glory of God and the Lamb? No. Why not? Because God is unwilling? Because God is using his power to cause some type of unpleasantness for them. Because God is taking some type of retribution against them. Listen to why. She gives why. Years of probation were granted them that they might form characters for heaven, but they have never trained the mind to love purity. They have never learned the language of heaven, and now it is too late. A life of rebellion against God has unfitted them for heaven. What has happened? Why has it happened? Why did it happen? Was it a judicial process? Its purity, holiness, and peace will be torture to them. Torture? Look, we got torture. Yeah, there's torture. Is God using his power to inflict torture? No. The glory of God would be a consuming fire. What kind of fire? Are the righteous in this fire? Are they hurt or damaged by this fire? They would long to flee from that holy place. They would welcome destruction that they might be hidden from the face of him who died to redeem them. The destiny of the wicked is fixed by their own choice. Their exclusion from heaven is voluntary with themselves and just and merciful on the part of God. If their exclusion from heaven is voluntary, then is it an infliction upon them? No. If it's voluntary, then is it compelled upon them? Is it coerced? No. No compelling power is ever used in God's government.
Amen.
He doesn't coerce. Like the waters of the flood, the fires of the great day declare God's verdict. What's another word for verdict? Judgment. Right? Judgment or diagnosis. Yeah. But here's the verdict. That the wicked are incurable. Incurable. This is design law. This is a state of being. This is not a legal condition. This is a characterological condition. So remember all these quotes as we go into the lesson for today.